Welcome to my video series on stats. My name is Osei-Yaw. This presentation is a basic guide on t-tests for dependent means for novice statisticians. Simply speaking, a t-test determines the means of different groups. A t-test for dependent means compares the means between two related groups. In this presentation, you'll be able to determine when to apply a t-test for dependent means. You'll also get an idea of how to compute the t-value. You will also explore some of the factors to consider when conducting a t-test for dependent means. Here is some key terminology that you should be familiar with and explore further on your own. Mean. We have the mean, which is the statistical average. Dependent. When you see the term dependent, that's your cue that the variables are related to one another. Inferential statistics is what we're currently working on, which means that we're trying to infer from the sample data and make judgments about the probability. Variance. You'll see the term variance, which measures how far each number in the set is from the means. Assumptions. We want to take a look at the normality of the data to see if the data is normally distributed. Now, this guide was developed by Neil Salkin, and it provides a clear guide on how to determine the correct statistic for a t-test. So here are some factors to consider. So you want to take a look at some of these factors and ask yourself some of these questions. So, am I examining the differences between groups of one or more variables? And are the same participants being tested more than once? If the participants are being tested more than once, then you want to take a look at how many groups you're dealing with. If you're dealing with two groups, then you would do the t-test for dependent samples. If you're dealing with more than two groups, then and repeated measures of analysis of variance would take place. But in our case, we're going to focus on t-tests for dependent samples because we're going to take a look at two groups. You also want to take a look at the assumptions. So there are 4 assumptions that you want to consider to make sure that you can analyze your data using a dependent t-test. Assumption 1. The dependent variable should be measured on a continuous scale. Assumption 2. The dependent variable should consist of 2 categorical related groups or matched pairs, which would indicate that the same subjects are present in both groups. Assumption number 3. There should be no significant outliers in the differences between the 2 related groups. And assumption 4, the distribution of the differences in the dependent variable between the 2 related groups should be approximately normally distributed. This next slide gives you the formula for computing the t-value of a test for dependent means if you want to run the numbers by hand. Neil Salkin breaks it down in easy to understand terms. If you take a look, you'll see the sum of the differences between the 2 tests forms the numerator and reflects the difference between groups of scores. Next up is the breakdown of the 8 steps that you should follow in order to compute a t-test. So step number 1, you need to state the null and research hypotheses. Step 2, set the level of risk associated with the null hypotheses. Step 3, select the appropriate test statistic. Step 4, compute the test statistic value. Step 5, determine the value needed for rejection of the null hypothesis. Step 6, compare the obtained value and the critical value. Step 7, if the obtained value is more extreme than the critical value, the null hypothesis cannot be accepted. Step 8, if the obtained value does not exceed the critical value, the null hypothesis is the most logical explanation. Well, by now, I hope that you have a bit of a better understanding of the t-test for dependent samples. I suggest that you practice further by running a data set on either Excel or SPSS. So check out my video series if you'd like to learn more. Take care.